Welcome to Gente On Air on 100.5 and 790 News Radio WSGW and online WSGW.com. Now, here is your host, Larry Rodarte.
Good evening. Buenos noches. Happy New Year, everyone. Welcome back to Mi Gente On Air in 2022. The holidays are over and we're here back at the Alpha Media Studios. I hope that everyone is safe and doing what they need to do to stay healthy. My producer is attempting to have us go live stream, so I guess I have to be on my best behavior here, and we're going to stumble along the way, and that's a given, but we will try our best to bring you a great show each week. So what are your thoughts on Mi Gente On Air, now in our second year of the show? You know, it's a show to promote Latino contributions, cultures, and concerns. That's been our main theme all along. And we're here. We have a unique culture as a people, part of the greater community of Americans. I hope you will spread the word about Mi Gente On Air here on WSGW 100.5 FM and 790 AM. Let's talk, let's listen, and let's have a dialogue about issues concerning us, bringing forth people in our community doing great things. I've had a career in journalism spanning over 25 years, and I'm really grateful for that. And it's been pretty rewarding. And I've always admired great journalists who help us to understand a story better. And one of the great journalists that I have followed through the years is Luis Aguilar out of Detroit. He's an award-winning journalist and an author, and he is an arts fellow. He has worked as a project reporter for the Detroit News for over 15 years and was a senior reporter also for Bridge Detroit. And he has chronicled the rise, the fall of his native Detroit. I want to welcome Luis Aguilar to Mi Gente On Air as a fellow journalist and an admirer of his work. Welcome, Luis.
Oh, thank you. Happy New Year. That's very kind words. Thank you so much.
Hey, buddy, you've earned it. Anybody who's been is a journalist for as long as you have been, as well as myself. I mean, you know, it takes a special kind of person, and I've always seen that with you, you know, and the work that you've done. And so I congratulate you on the longevity of your career, as well as just the neat projects that you have been involved with. And that's part of the whole reason why I invited Luis to the show, because he has a real affinity for Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera. And we're going to talk about that more in the show, but I want to give Luis the chance to tell my listeners exactly who he is and what his background story is.
Well, I'm a native of Southwest Detroit. Actually, my mother's family moved to the Corktown neighborhood, about 95 years ago, actually. Like many people of their generation, many Latinos and other immigrants and others, they moved to Detroit because of factories and manufacturing work, as did my father during the Korean War, actually.
Yeah.
I grew up in Detroit. I went to Wayne State. I left Detroit for about 15 years to go to other cities. And then around 2004, I returned back to Detroit. Like most people from Detroit, they come back, usually because of family reasons. And mine was also because of family. My mother actually had passed away, but there were others in my family that probably needed my help, so I came back. But it was also a good opportunity to come back to Detroit. I mean, I wanted to leave so bad, and then I kind of wanted to actually come back really bad. So,
isn't that something we all kind of, I kind of similarly did that role and, ended up back in Saginaw after living in Detroit for about 15 years. So it's kind of like the same thing. Yeah. I just didn't go to the bigger cities, but I did go to stayed in the state of Michigan, and you mentioned Southwest Detroit. So you're like right from the Mexican town area, correct?
Oh, yeah, I guess. I mean, it's funny you call it Mexican town. I mean, nobody when I grew up actually called it Mexican town.
Yeah, but it's kind of funny because now that's what it's referred to, and
Yeah,
we
sure.
hear about the Mexican areas in Chicago or even in LA or whatever, and none of those are referred to as Mexican Town the way Mexican Town in Detroit is. I think
Yeah.
that's pretty amazing. I mean, I was really surprised to learn that. And
Yeah, yeah. It's funny. When I grew up basically during the '70s, and Southwest Detroit wasn't as Mexican as it is now. Actually, during the sort of resurgence, I think that began in the '90s with the new wave of immigrants, particularly from Jalisco.
yeah,
But when I grew up, it was really sort of Latino Mexican tinged. But it was I was very grateful for all the diversity in the neighborhoods of still lots of sort of white ethnics of Greeks, Irish, Appalachian Southern, Polish, lots of Eastern Europeans, but also Filipino and Vietnamese, Thai, certainly lots of Middle Eastern, and of course African American. I was really grateful for growing up in that environment, and I really think it helped me as a journalist because I mean, really, that's the way most cities are. And when I went to places like Washington D.C. or Denver or Los Angeles, I mean, it really did feel like and it felt like Southwest Detroit. I mean, it was just sort of Mexican tinge, but everything else thrown in it.
a real eclectic
I
group.
felt very comfortable. Yeah, I felt very comfortable with so many other different groups.
Wow.
Which I realized that not everyone does. Well, maybe not everyone. I mean, sometimes it takes others who don't grow up with that. It takes them a while to adjust to that, and I think that really helped me as a journalist. That I didn't sort of freak out about having to learn about other cultures or things. One, I often had familiarity with it, and two, even if I didn't really have weird assumptions about it.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. I worked at the Saginaw News for a little bit as a intern back in the mid '90s, and it really was, the newsroom was really a newsroom, like you see
yeah.
on all the President's Men movie, and it just I was
Yeah.
really invigorated by my cohorts around me vigorously typing on those ancient typewriters to get a story
Yeah.
out. And I wanted to ask you the question: how was it for you at the Detroit News? Did you have a similar newsroom, or what? Because now everybody's at home doing their thing.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a big city newsroom. I mean, speaking of all the president's men, I actually did work at the Washington Post for a while.
Oh, you did?
So I mean, yeah, I worked there in let's see, when the hell did I work there?
Prior to your
Mid
stint.
'90s, mid '90s.
Okay, prior to your stint with the Detroit News, then, right?
Yeah, I left for 15 years. I lived Colorado, then DC, and then back to Colorado. So, but yeah, I worked at the Washington Post, and that really was an international place. I mean, really, you can go there any time of the day because it has an international desk and all that kind of stuff. You could see people, on the phone, like at Sunday, like at 2:00 in the morning, because they're dealing with Tokyo and things like that.
Yeah, yeah.
So it really did have this kind of 24/7 kind of thing happening. And there was just a sea of people in cubicles. And Detroit News is a much more of a city paper, but yeah, it does have that large newsroom. But the state of newspapers, man. I mean, there were more and more empty cubicles. I mean, at one point there was an empty floor, and then we moved in. We actually moved when I was there to a smaller building where we just took up 2 floors. And by the time I left that, there were still lots of empty cubicles and things like that. So it was tough to see that, and there was almost an annual loss of people through buyouts and things like that. It was really hard to see.
Yeah, I know it was to me, in just in a short time period, just because of the evolution of technology and everything else from the '90s, the mid '90s, all the way till what the late 2000s, it just changed drastically, and the newsrooms that we knew back in those days are no longer around. So it really was devastating to see.
Yeah.
But can you tell me a little bit about your work there with the Bridge Detroit, because that whole initiative with the Kresge Foundation and others?
Oh yeah, so it was. There is a wave of hyper local, they call it, as newspapers do sort of shrink, and people are really concerned about the lack of local coverage about things that matter, from city council and local government and tax breaks. So it was one of those efforts, the nonprofit newsroom, and the newsroom was very small. It is still very small. It was founded by a publication that actually, a nonprofit that started about 10, 15 years ago for something called Bridge Michigan, which is a much more like, they take a look at Michigan overall,
Mm-hmm.
and they wanted to start something specifically about Detroit.
Yeah.
So there was a guy named Stephen Henderson. He won a Pulitzer Prize for his editorials at the Free Press, and now he's on the local public radio station here in Detroit, as well as local public television for, I think, American Black Journal. He worked on helping raise money to get this initiative off the ground, and it's three reporters and an editor sort of figured out what Detroiters really want in their coverage. I mean, very local about more city council stuff, more profiles of people. So it's one of those movements that's very hyper local, to bring back sort of the nuts and bolts of Detroit, of City Hall and things like that. Things that there's not as much coverage in the local papers anymore because of budget cuts.
Yeah.
And it's just one of the many movements of going on. I mean, I can name like 4 such nonprofit news sites here in Detroit, specifically about Detroit. And I hope Saginaw has a few of them going as well. And so, it's all part of the grand experiment, to sort of keep the public informed about important things, everything from sort of zoning to neighborhood issues.
Yeah.
So I was very happy to be part of that moment, especially during the moments we had. I mean, literally, wow. I mean, yeah, my last week at the Detroit News in 2020 was the week that, it was the week before the state lockdown. But at that point, Dan Gilbert and Quicken Loans had announced that he wasn't going to, he wanted all his workers to stay out of downtown, to not go. And that sort of caused okay, everybody should stay home. So the last week at the Detroit News, which is downtown Detroit, I just remember it was so empty, and it was like the 90s again, man. It was like, oh my God, there's nobody around. And it was eerie. And so I started during the pandemic, and then there was, the Black Lives Matter events, and then the elections that never ended. It was a hell of a time to be a reporter in Detroit or anywhere, and it was stressful. I'm so glad I got to do it, but I mean, it really took its toll. And that's one of the reasons I mean, we don't even have the Bridge Detroit never even got around to having an office, because I mean, it would have been didn't make sense, because I mean, we all worked out of our house anyway because of safety.
Yeah, because of COVID. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was a very strange time. It was, I mean, a startup always is pretty intense, and then to have those things happen one after the other or simultaneously was even more. It was really a remarkable period.
Yeah. And that's part of, why I felt it was important for you to come on the show as well today, because they hear from me in regard to what we went through in 2020. And, I had to get away and take a vacation. I mentioned that to you. My mind, I couldn't focus. And I think that, it was really a historical time for journalists, because there was so much going on, from George Floyd passing away, like you mentioned, and the Black Lives Matter, and then the election that never ended. I haven't heard it described that way before, but I do now. I'm going to probably use your words there, but it was just so much in the polarization of our country. That was another whole story.
Yeah.
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 So it's
Yeah.
I hear you, man.
I was. It was. I'll be honest. I mean, it was the election that broke me because I was literally at the it's now called the Huntington Center. For a while, for a minute, it was called the TCF Center. But usually it's Kobo.
Oh
But
yeah.
it's where they were counting the absentee ballots. So I was literally there the day that it was stormed by a group of Trump supporters,
I
and
remember that.
I will never forget the image. So I'm in a room full of basically black women doing their duty of counting absentee ballots, and there was a glass wall, and it was locked, and just this wave of angry white people with Trump signs, literally pounding on the door, literally trying to storm and stop the vote. And then, I mean, that was such a traumatic event. And then, I thought, then there were the lawsuits, and then I thought it was over, and then January 6th happened. I mean, which, funny.
A year
We're
ago
talking about
today.
this.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, yeah, but, as a journalist, I mean, there is a huge amount of energy and run up to the election itself. I mean, just the coverage, and you stay up all, late that night. And then usually you get to take a break, but we never had a break.
Yeah.
And so literally the amount of hours and emotion that was put into this, I was like, oh my goodness, I really felt like I never really fully recovered, to be honest. I mean, I thought we should continue like, hey man, we can follow this story, and with the lawsuits, everything. But there was so much more to cover. So
Yeah.
I mean, it was,
Well, that's one of the things
it's
why,
a moment.
that's why one of the reasons I took a
Yeah, I
sabbatical, if
know.
you will.
I
And
think,
I would
yeah.
highly recommend it because, you
Oh
got to
yeah.
stay healthy. You got to stay healthy in your
Yeah.
journalistic mind and, have a clear head. And it really, I think, because we as Americans had never experienced what we did in 2020 at that level.
Correct. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, if you woke up in any given morning during 2020, there was all kinds of news that,
Yes. Yeah.
and for me, it was like way too much. I couldn't focus, and
Yeah. I'm
that's,
glad you got away, man.
yeah,
That's a very positive thing.
yeah, yeah. Well, listen, I want to talk to you a little bit more about the your connection to Frida and Diego. But first, before we get into that, and I want to talk about the Accidental Mummies of Guanajuato.
Oh.
I remember that beautiful exhibit there at the Detroit Science
Wow.
Center. I
You
was
did
there. I
your
thought it was one of
research.
the best I've ever seen. My great grandfather is from Guanajuato,
Oh,
and so
beautiful. A gorgeous city.
there was a mummy at the exhibit with a cowboy hat. Do you remember in the cowboy
Oh,
boot?
yes.
I
Yeah.
took that. Man, this is exactly probably what my grandfather looked like in that time period. So tell me a little bit about your experience with that, as well as you authored a book about that exhibit, right?
That's correct. Yeah. Yeah. No, I was just fortunate enough. I mean, a good friend of mine, who someone you probably know, her name is Martina Guzman.
Oh yeah.
She was so the local science museum had arranged to have the mummies of Guanajuato to be here as an exhibit in Detroit, and so the museum reached out to some of the local Latino community to help put it in context and what should we do. And so that person that they hired was Martina Guzman, and at that point, every exhibit, has to have sort of a book, sort of the official book about what the exhibit is. And so she contacted me like, hey, look, we're going to contract somebody to write. And she knew I had some experience with Guanajuato. I'd actually lived there years ago for like a very brief moment with someone I had a relationship with someone who was studying Spanish there.
Oh, there's a
So
story right there. No.
yeah.
Go ahead.
So she knew that I had some familiarity with Guanajuato and that I was a writer, and then like, hey man, you should apply. So I just put in a bid. I mean, I just put in a bid about what the book should be about. And I actually remember going up to Traverse City, a city I really love. And I went to a bookstore because I had in mind, well, I mean, Mexico, Guanajuato mummies, this thing has got to be photocentric. It's got to be really colorful and beautiful. The city itself and all that kind of stuff. So I went to this great bookstore in Traverse City, and I started looking through all these kind of coffee table like books with huge pictures. And somebody on the staff asked me, like, "Hey, what are you looking for?" I'm like, "Hey, I got a chance to write a book like this, and I'm looking for really good examples of like coffee table books with really colorful, great writing." And so I remember this. Literally all the staff at some point just brought me their favorite coffee table books, and I just had this. And so that was, I always remember how grateful, helpful they were, and that helped me put the bid together. And I got the bid, so I wrote, and it was great to go to Guanajuato in February on somebody else's dime and live pretty good,
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
and write the book and do the exploration and there, Guanajuato, and it's a remarkably culturally rich city.
Yes.
And it's close to. There's a lot of American expats there, especially near the nearby city of San Miguel de Allende. So we hired a really talented photographer from San Miguel, and I got to do this beautiful book about not just the mummies itself, but
the city,
the Mexican culture, how beautiful Guanajuato is, which is just gorgeous. I was very honored and lucky to do that.
Well, I want to explain to my listeners in regard to what we're talking about with the mummies. We're talking about the mummies that they have in the mines of Guanajuato in the mountains that were preserved. These mummies were from over 100 years old, weren't they?
Yeah, they're called the Accidental Mummies because Guanajuato is a very high altitude place, and they were buried. I think, like a lot of places in Mexico, they're buried not in the ground, but like in like sort of a stack of tombs,
Mm-hmm.
And so they're very airtight, and they're very so at some point, I forget when, it's a small town, really, kind of, and so at some point there was something called a grave tax, and if the family couldn't pay the grave tax, they actually sort of dug up removed the body, and then when that happened, unlike because the place was airtight, it was free of bugs, because that's usually why a body decomposes. Oxygen gets in and bugs do its part, but they're in these airtight tombs without any bugs or anything. So when they open one up, like, oh my God, it's a mummy. And then suddenly, like, hey, there's a lot of people who haven't paid their grave tax.
And so they opened up all these tombs. Yeah.
Yeah,
well, it was remarkable that they were able to bring those actual mummies to an exhibit, like at the Detroit Science Museum, and it was just beautiful in the way it was done. So I give kudos to anybody who was involved with that, because I was really touched in how beautiful that was.
Yeah.
And I took a whole group of people from Saginaw. I think there was a contingent of about 10 or 12 of us. And we went down there, and, the way it was set up. And I think President Vicente Fox was there with his wife, and they spoke at the opening. Right, yeah. Do you remember that? And so it really, what a beautiful cultural event it was for us, those that experienced that. And I'm going to have to look for your book and take a look at that, because I love Guanajuato as a city. I've been there myself. But listen, we're going to go into commercial. We're going to be right back, and we're going to talk more with Detroit journalist Luis Aguilar, and his experience as a journalist, as well as his upcoming projects in writing a book about Diego Rivera and Frida Kahlo. So join us in a moment after commercials. Thank you. Hello, this is Larry Rodarte, and I am live streaming here on Mi Gente On Air, and it's a new concept for me because I would rather just hear my voice, but they're giving me the directive to go live stream so that we make more of an awareness to our community of who we are, what we're doing, and always promoting the contributions of the Latinos in our community. So you're seeing me live on live stream, and I've got to figure out how to share it on my Facebook page and get more community involvement, get feedback from the community. And I hope you're enjoying tonight's show with Luis Aguilar from Detroit. And we're going to be right back with him and talk a little bit more with you, our listeners and our viewers on Facebook or wherever platform you're on here on Mi Gente On Air. On Air, and I'm talking with a great journalist. He has written many stories in the Detroit News. He has the experience coming out of Southwest Detroit as his native hometown. His name is Luis Aguilar, and he's with us tonight. Thank you for being with me tonight, Luis, again.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, we are really happy that you have continued in this long career as a journalist because you and I both know there are very few Hispanic journalists out there. And
Yeah.
we definitely need more coming from within our ranks. And so I want to throw the question to you. What would you say to any young aspiring journalist, somebody who may be thinking about writing as a career? What would you say maybe are the ups, maybe what are the downs?
Oh, I would say, depending on how young you're talking about, I guess someone college age who's interested in journalism, I would say one, get internships because that's really the way you learn if you really like the job because it's hard to reproduce in a newsroom. I mean, in a classroom, because it's sort of like working at a restaurant. I mean, you can either handle the pressure or not. And so some people thrive on it, some people don't like it. So if you're in college and thinking about it, I mean, I would really encourage you to get internships to get a real sense of if you like the job. And also, it really gives you a leg up in getting hired somewhere when you get out of college.
Yeah.
In terms of being a journalist, I mean, there's so many different options now. I would, even more than when we were in college, I mean, you really have to be diverse in your skills in terms of know some video editing, know how to do social media. I mean, not just write, but maybe, do some graphics stuff. But
Yeah.
I mean, so you really have to be very versatile in your skills. And I don't know if really a lot of journalists want to. I'm always curious to see how many young reporters really do want to write, and as opposed to just do video editing or make videos or something like that. But surprisingly, I do find a lot of very young, talented journalists who are really into being writers, on the web, whatever. But everything from being investigative reporters to sports writers, that kind of thing. So I'm always encouraged when I meet very talented young people. They're always so versatile in what they know, in terms of they do know a lot about editing and way more about social media than I ever will probably learn.
Yeah. Well, if you run into any in the future, shoot them my way with Mi Gente magazine. We're still publishing that publication, 27 years, and I can always use a good different lens, if you will, from a different perspective. So yeah, shoot them my way if you can. I want to ask you, Luis. I have an affinity also for Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera.
Sure. Well does.
Yeah. And 10 years ago, I remember it was in 2012. I'm getting confused with the years.
Wow.
The years are just really going by now.
Yeah,
but 2012, I remember I attended with some friends. We drove from Saginaw down to Detroit into this like almost an abandoned building, I remember, but we were there to attend the Troublemakers, Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera in Detroit, a production that you wrote the script for. What an opportunity. Can you tell me a little bit about that and that amazing production that you were involved with?
Oh, so you probably saw it. You saw the production outside the train station in Corktown? Is that the one you saw with the outdoors?
No.
Or was it like in a downtown theater?
It was like in a downtown abandoned theater. I want to say it was abandoned. Yeah.
Oh, it was in the upper floor of. Oh, yeah, that was called the Elizabeth Theater.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. So, well, thank you for going to that. But anyway, so I, through my family, actually, something my mother said to me when I was like, I don't know, 35 or 36, I was working at the Washington Post. And every time I would come home, I would go visit the Diego Rivera mural. And then one time when I was home, I remember for like the holidays, I'm sort of planning my day with my mother, like, oh, I'm going to go do this, do that. And I remember she said off the cuff, like, oh, I don't know why you go see that thing every time you hear them. I mean, we knew them when they were here, and they were such troublemakers. And I was like, what are you talking about? And then she told me the story, like, oh yeah, they used to come to, my mother was like, I don't know, like 4 or 5 at the time when all this happened in 1932 and 1933 when Diego was here with Frida.
Uh-huh.
And then she told me the story, like, oh yeah, they used to come to the neighborhood and people went to go see him paint, and they were like crazy, like communists, and they were like they were all over the map, and I was just like, what the? I was just blown away that she actually knew these. I mean, well, not her personally, but I mean that these stories existed. And I started to ask around, and people told me great stories, and I was just flabbergasted that there was such a deep connection, and I never put together, I never read about, and that really started a long quest of what should I do with this information, and I didn't really know what to do with it. And then thankfully I had the opportunity to write that book that you mentioned about the Accidental Mummies in Guanajuato, and that led to me getting something called the Kresge Literary Arts Fellowship, which is a great fellowship here in Detroit for artists. And I applied, and really it's just a $25,000 grant with no strings attached. But I used it to, when I applied, I said, if I get this money, I really want to chase the greatest story I know about Detroit that nobody seems to know about, and that is the time Diego Rivera and Frida Kahlo spent in Detroit and how much they spent with the Mexican-American community and just their interaction with Detroit. Yeah. And so I won the grant, and I used the $25,000 to take 6 months off to begin to research that story. And I found just an incredible story. And that led to the opportunity to sort of produce a performance, because when you won at Kresge that year, they announced something called this local festival called ArtX, which is if you won a Kresge fellowship, come up with an idea of a performance, because we're going to have like this week-long performance in various venues, and we're going to give you more money to do it. And I was like, whoa, I don't, all I was sort of researching this thing for a story, whatever. But at that point, I knew that I had enough of like the dialogue of what Frida and Diego said while they were in Detroit, all the things that got said about them. Because, as people may know, when the Diego Rivera mural was first debuted, it was at very much like a time like now, a very divided society and city. It was during the height of the Depression. People were so afraid of communists and Mexicans and all that kind of stuff. And Diego was a Marxist. And so there was a huge backlash to destroy the mural, to whitewash it. I mean, there were front page editorials about, it was un-American, he was a foreigner, that kind of thing. So I just saw this huge, great story. And so I got a chance to produce a performance on it. And I first did it in Rivera Court, I don't know, like in 2012. And that went really well. And there were, some musician friends of mine like, oh, let me write the score. I'm like, wow, sure. And somebody, I feel like I'm like, well, you got all this great images. Let's put together like this great film in the back as we're doing this performance. And so it just became, it's the artsiest PowerPoint presentation you can imagine, basically.
Yeah. I got to witness it, and I got to take pictures, and you had Detroit personalities there, other
exactly.
reporters, journalists. Charles, what was his name? Charlie
LaDuff.
LaDuff, yes, great performance that night too. Yeah, and I just want to let the listeners know that if they don't know, Diego Rivera was commissioned by the Detroit Institute of Arts to come and paint these murals, which they're known as frescoes. And if you haven't been to the DIA in your lifetime to see these murals, you've got to go, because it's just amazing the work that he did. And there was, like Luis has said, there was a lot of backlash, and they tried to whitewash them. And luckily, the arts community was strong and came forward and fought to keep those murals there. And so in the meantime, in the backstory of all this is that Frida Kahlo comes to Detroit. She arrives at the Detroit train station and takes a famous picture with the Detroit News that is, very famous to this day. And she says to one of the reporters there, they said, "Who are you?" And she says, "I am the greatest artist in the world." Can you believe she said that back in the 1930s? And then she goes on, she has a life. They stay in one of the hotels in Detroit. She gets pregnant. She loses the baby at Henry Ford Hospital. I mean, there's just so much there. And you are so lucky to, be at the cuff of trying to write this story, because it truly is a great story, and it's great history for Detroit as well as the state of Michigan and in America, because as we know, Frida Kahlo has become, probably one of the greatest artists in the world.
Somewhere between a cult and a just I don't know, an icon and a cult. I don't really. It's really amazing,
right?
Many people don't know actually. So she arrives in Detroit. She is virtually unknown. I mean, she's 25 when she first arrived, and she really is unknown. And it's here in Detroit, literally in an amazing span of 7 months after she loses her child, that she creates what everyone considers her first 3 masterpieces, something that's truly groundbreaking art. And 2 of them have very Detroit themes, and I love every one of them. One is based on the death of her mother in Mexico. The other is based on her miscarriage at Henry Ford Hospital, and it's called Henry Ford Hospital. And the other one, which is actually my favorite, it's just her. It's called Me Standing on the Border of the U.S. and Mexico, and it's her in a gorgeous dress, and one side is Mexico, and one side is sort of the Fort Rouge and New York skyscrapers, and it speaks so much to cultural alienation and identity, just as the Henry Ford Hospital. What's so funny, I mean, it really is based on the Mexican retablos, those sort of very simple paintings on tin where people paint sort of an act of near harrowing death that they survived, and they like a car accident or something like that, and they think a saint saved them and saved their life. And so there's always these images of sort of like whatever the calamity is, and then in the corner is sort of a La Virgen de Guadalupe or some other saint who has saved them in that particular moment. And that's usually what a Mexican retablo is. And hers is based on that, but it is such a modern take because there is no saint. It's just the Fort Rouge. It's her pain in the bed. So that fusion of Mexican tradition with a completely modern take is just so groundbreaking, even today. And I've seen that painting. I thankfully, because of that performance and that grant, I was able to go to Frida Kahlo exhibits. I went to one in Vienna, and I went to one in Istanbul.
Wow.
And those paintings were always there because of their status as their first masterpieces. And that image, I swear to God, I've seen people just break down and cry because it's so. I mean, no man can paint that. I mean, there's no idealization or sexualization of her body. And I mean, she's literally lying in her bed and she's bleeding. I mean, it's a pretty graphic, but there's no also like sense of self-pity. It's a very like self-realization, a stark self-realization of the moment she's going through. It really is a truly amazing painting.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, in fact, I think I'm going to write about that for a publication coming up next month. But I'm also working on a book. But I forgot where this question was going.
Well, I did get to see that painting as well, and
I was in Detroit.
Yeah, it's just amazing what she did in that short period of time. And if I don't know if she didn't have that experience of what she was experiencing in Detroit, not only the loss of the baby, but the alienation that she felt, being away from home and missing her mother, missing her family, would we have those paintings that we have today, And I was in London in 2018, and they had at the Albert Victoria Museum.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Oh, my God. This incredible exhibit that featured her clothing, as well as so many personal items of her that were found, and that Diego had somehow said, this isn't to be shown until 50 years after the passing. You remember that? And I think it's going to be in New York too. But yeah, I got to see it in London, and I went back twice. I had to pay for a membership in order to see it because the lines were so long and tickets were sold out, and I had to pay like a membership for the museum, $75. Just to get in as a member. So, and I did it because I said, I've got to see this. This is incredible. And, here she was, Mexicana from Mexico, and she was all the way out in London, so that was really something.
I'm not exaggerating that literally somewhere in the world right now, there is a Frida Kahlo exhibit going on, and it is a blockbuster show. And there are now offshoots. I mean, there's an exhibit just about her dresses. There's an exhibit about her gardening.
Yeah.
There's an exhibit just of her photos, and not really just of her, not even of her paintings, but just of photos of her because she was remarkably photogenic. So yeah, she is. She's a phenomenon. I mean, it is truly amazing.
Yeah, and we have her as this phenomenon, and it continually grows. Her persona and her iconic images, and it's just amazing to me to see how much in just the last 20 years how that has continually grown, not just here in the United States, but also in Europe and throughout the world.
Sure, yeah.
So tell me a little bit about your book then. Where are you with the book?
Oh, so I mean, really, I've been chasing this idea for ever since, really, even before. But when I won that Kresge grant, and I got to do that performance, I did get approached by an agent, and which was a big deal to me. And I thought I was on my way. I'm like, wow, great, man. I mean, the play came so easily. I didn't know I could write a play, so I was like, wow, I'm on my way. That was 10 years ago, and I'm a journalist. And I thought, I've won lots of awards for writing. I did write another book, but to write a book, like a real book, like for a major publisher, where they could potentially be a movie deal or a TV series, that is a whole different ball of wax. And I had no idea how much I had to learn to be able to do that. So I remember showing my agent my proposal, the thing you sort of have to show the agent. And the reason you get an agent is that's really the only way you can get a publishing deal from a major publisher, because they're the ones who pitch it.
Right.
And they need this thing called a proposal, which is like 40 pages of what the book is about, who you are, who's going to buy it, why there's a market, chapter outline, chapter samples. It's a pretty intense thing. And I tried to do part of that, I don't know, at least 7 years ago, to give this agent. And she said, no, this isn't even close, man. I mean, this won't do. And I was pretty crushed because I didn't know how to do it any better. And so I went on a quest to try to take creative writing classes in my off time. And I was lucky enough to get into other writing fellowships. We can go away in these beautiful places and they treat you well and you get the right it was pretty nice. But really, I mean, during the lockdown, because I was locked down in my house, I did actually start to take, I took 2 really intense online classes of how to write a nonfiction book, creative nonfiction book. And the last one I took, which I just finished last month, was at Harvard Online. And that was really, really intense. I mean, so I was working like, between my intense job and this intense class at Harvard of how to write a nonfiction book, I was working like 80 hours a week. I mean, I was writing every day from like,
wow.
So they went on to like, from Labor Day till just last month, just a few weeks ago, where I was working really hard because it's a really great class and I learned a lot. And the professor is the editor of the Harvard Review, which is sort of this very prestigious literary review. And she's also a very good author herself. And so for the chance to have me show her my stuff, it was a really great thing. And also everyone, I mean, there was like 12 people in the class, so they limited it to like 12 people. And everyone has to be working on a nonfiction book. They have to have, not just thinking about it. They've been working on something for a while. So it really was sort of an international group of writers literally from all up from London, Japan. There was another Harvard professor in there. There was somebody from LA, somebody from Canada, that kind of thing. So all of them really talented. And, I got great feedback. And then when my professor told me that my proposal, the thing again you give to agents, said, you know what? I mean, this is ready. I mean, this should really get you a major publishing deal. And then, and that's the first time I felt this confident about pitching this book since I started. I mean, I've been waiting for this moment where I felt I could be ready, because I didn't realize how much I had to learn. So that's the stage I'm at. I mean, it all came kind of to a head when this month where I'm like, I can't keep working 80 hours a week. It's killing me. I mean, It really is like, I mean, it's a very intense job. And this thing now, this side hustle has now really come to a forefront where I got to find out one way or the other if I can really sell this thing. So, I mean, I'm no longer with Bridge Detroit. I mean, it's not really the way I planned it, but it did work out that way.
Mm-hmm.
But I did know that I wanted to do, I mean, it's unfair to ask a small nonprofit like, hey, man, I might need a year to write my book.
Yeah.
I mean, I just realized that was not going to be possible. And I'm at the point now where I really need to find out, because I've been chasing this damn thing ever since my mother told me that story. Like,
The troublemakers.
yeah, I mean, and then ever since I won the Kresge 10 years ago, I mean, I've really been trying to work hard on it during my, my side, when I'm not really doing the day job. And so I'm really grateful that I just have a chance finally to find out if I'm going to get a book deal. So I sent my proposal to an agent that I've been working with for a couple years now. And she's taking a look at it now, and I'm trying to see what she's going to say. But there's a couple other agents who I'm also probably going to send it to. I sort of made this announcement on Facebook, which is how you kind of found out.
Yeah, that's how I found you.
Yeah. And then one of my friends is a really great author. He used to be a journalist, and he's a really successful author. And he read it. He's like, "Oh my God, man, you got to send your stuff to my agent." And he's a really big agent.
Wow.
And I'm like, okay, yeah, that's great. And then someone else who knows somebody, a Latina, I guess, from Houston, who I guess is doing pretty well. I don't know if she knows about me or somehow, but they're getting me in touch with her, and I'm like, okay, all right.
Well, I think you're on the right path, buddy. And anything with Frida Kahlo, I mean, it really turns to gold these days in our time period. But so I wish you luck, and thank you so much, Luis, for being on the show here today. It's been very interesting talking with Detroit journalist Luis Aguilar, and I thank you all for listening here on Mi Gente On Air as we go into the year 2 of this show to talk about Latino contributions, concerns, and culture. See you next week. Hasta luego.